All right, so here we go. We're going to get into it now. We're going to get into this political article, and the headline is Pelosi unveils a $3 trillion coronavirus relief plan amid squeeze from left and the right. So now let me just give you a brief overview. They've done 3.5 stimuluses now, which is actually 4. And in none of them did they give health care to people. In none of them did they give a UBI to people. In none of them did they have any plans to actually help people. Right? They have lots of plans to help oligarchs and huge corporations. But that's about it. So here's what's in. Right. So that's right. So here's what's in this bill a little bit. Right. So we've been screaming that none of the Democrats will call out their House leadership. Nancy Pelosi, the Democrats took over the House. The whole point of that is that we can have some power and control. And she's legislating as if she's Mitch McConnell. OK, just so you know, because they serve the same people. So here's what's inside. According to Politico, this is what's inside this bill. And then we're going to show you what's really inside the bill. OK. So according to Politico, It says Democrats released their sprawling package known as the HEROES Act on Tuesday afternoon. The legislation includes $875 billion for cash for sale and local governments. $850 billion cash for state and local governments. What Democratic leaders say is the centerpiece of the 5th coronavirus relief package. It also includes $20 billion each for tribal nations and for U.S. territories. The measure also includes provisions to support multi-employer pensions. Democrats also included a $75 billion to ramp up coronavirus testing and contact tracing in an effort that both parties say will be crucial to reopening state economies. The legislation also includes a slew of other liberal priorities left out of previous bills, including $75 billion for mortgage relief and $100 billion in assistance for renters, $25 billion for the U.S. Postal Service, and $3.6 billion to shore up elections. The bill, so my point is, now let me just stop there. Dylan, why did they have to wait till the 5th stimulus bill to get any of this stuff in there?
I think we all know why. The immediate response when we had our first unofficial Corona money talk, which I guess was in March, right after the initial market crash and all the things that were happening at that time, the initial immediate reflex was to rescue the financial institutions and the wealthiest people in America, which is what they did in the blink of an eye. Immediately, they rescued the stock market. They rescued the large banks. They bailed out Bill Ackman. They bailed out Ken Griffin, one of the richest hedge fund managers in the world. They bailed out Ray Dalio. All of the wealthiest and most powerful people in the country were bailed out in March as a reflex. And then since then, they have been incrementally using the bailout bills as opportunities to bail out slightly less rich people. And at the same time, they have really proven, I think the thing that really strikes me the most is that they've proven that even given a couple of months to look around and think about it, they really, 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 really don't want to give people health care.
Really?
Which, I mean, they've had a couple of months. I mean, they've had so much time to really understand how much health care has been lost from the depression level, unemployment levels that we now have. They understand the demand for health care is at an all-time high, which is partially caused by a global pandemic. If you haven't noticed, there's a bit of a pandemic going on, which creates some medical needs. And even in the face of the pandemic, and even in the face of depression-level unemployment, in the face of having a couple of months to contemplate the matter, the only thing they could offer in the way of health care was subsidies for private health insurance with COBRA.
Yeah. So yes. All right. So
I don't mean to change the subject on you, but when I look at what happened today, what I really saw when I looked through all the things that we're going to talk about was a country and a Democratic Party specifically that is completely and utterly and firmly and resolutely committed to making sure that it's really expensive and hard to get health care and that health insurance companies make lots and lots of money. And it is unlike any other country on earth. I mean, countries like Rwanda are working on a national healthcare system. Countries that we would theoretically condescend to for their overall quality of life, like India, have national healthcare systems. And yet this country, theoretically the richest in the world, theoretically the most powerful in the world, in the face of global or Great Depression level unemployment and a pandemic, still refuses to offer health care to the people that live in this country, and yet insists on making sure the people in this country pay double what any other group of people in the world pay for their health care in order to enrich the financial institutions that run the health insurance companies. That alone is a staggering indictment of the entire political class, led by, in this case, the Democrats, who claim the mantle of wanting to offer people help as a rhetorical flourish, not as something that they do, but as a marketing, as part of the Democratic Party's marketing. There's this sort of marketing around quote unquote caring about quote unquote people, and yet they don't do it, and still you see all of these people that want to support Democrats. It's amazing to me that anybody could possibly support Nancy Pelosi or the Democrats. It's easy to, like I said, it's easy to ridicule Donald Trump or the Republicans. It's inexplicable to me why anybody would support Joe Biden or Nancy Pelosi. I don't even know how to comprehend it.
Well, I just heard an environmentalist named Bill McKibben last night say that you have to vote for Joe Biden because we have an ability to influence him, but we don't have an ability to influence Trump. And guys who say stuff like that sound like chumps. Absolute chumps. As Joe Biden puts Larry Summers in his cabinet and gives you the both fingers in your fucking face, they still think they want to play inside the system. What needs to happen, Dylan, is people need to get in the streets and shut down capitalism. I mean, workers can shut down capitalism at the snap of a finger. We've seen that. If everybody at Amazon stayed home tomorrow, this goddamn country would shut down. If everybody at UPS stayed home tomorrow, this country would shut down. I think the fucking post office should go on strike until they get the money they need, because this whole goddamn country would shut down. There are many worker factions in this country that could shut this country down overnight, and we're realizing that right now. How about grocery workers? Grocery workers could shut down this country overnight, and that's the kind of shit that
it'd be closed tomorrow.
Tomorrow, the country would be going nuts. They'd have to bring in the National Guard to work at.
Look at how effective the protests in Hong Kong were, how massive and organized they were. Look at how effective the French are at doing exactly what you're describing. So it's not that it's not possible to do. There are two phenomenal examples of how effective protests can be in forcing structural political change, whether it's in France or in Hong Kong, are the two best recent examples. It's simple complacency and indifference and this desire to blame the opponent as opposed to doing anything. It is a stunning abdication of engagement that I think is even beyond something I would have ever imagined. I mean,
but Dylan,
for all the bravado of this country's sort of rah, we fight, blah, blah, it's a joke.
But Dylan, I get that Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer are complete robots of Wall Street, and they're evil, in fact. I get that.
They're evil agents of finance at the expense of the American people.
Evil agents of finance.
Literally at the cost of their health.
Literally, right?
Their lives.
But what I don't get is why there is absolutely no opposition to either of them in government. None. Ilhan Omar, he won't even stand up to them. AOC won't stand up to them. Bernie Sanders won't stand. No one will stand up for the American people in this moment. What's that?
Elizabeth Warren, nowhere to be found.
Nowhere to be found. No one will stand up for the American people right now. What they're doing, what Bernie Sanders is actually doing, is protecting the party. What AOC and Ilhan Omar are actually doing is protecting the party. They're not doing a goddamn thing to make sure people are taken care of, except writing letters to Nancy Pelosi begging. What they should be doing is organizing people to start shutting shit down, because we are in dire. This is not normal times. This is an existential threat right now. You think Donald Trump is an existential threat? This is an existential threat right now. And the progressive media is asleep. The progressive politicians are defending the party while screwing the people. And it's left to you and me to scream into the wind right now. That's it. We got nothing. And I can't go out and organize a strike because there's a fucking pandemic and I have underlying medical problems. And they know that shit.
It's a pretty good trick. It's a pretty good trick.
Pretty good trick. Let me
did
just.
you see that they did? You do? I mean, do you want to go back to the legislation? I feel like I took us a little bit off track.
Yeah.
But,
let me just
it was
finish.
amazing on the things on that list.
Let me just finish this article and then we'll get to it. Okay. So.
Yeah.
The bill would also make $10 billion available to small businesses that haven't received funds from the Paycheck Protection Program. Before the measure was released, Pelosi had cautioned members on Tuesday that some of them would be disappointed by what was left out of the bill. Democrats acknowledge that their behemoth proposal, whose summary alone is 90 pages, is more of a talking point than legislation they expect to become law. So this shit isn't even going to get passed. And you know why it's not going to get passed? Because they gave away all their leverage. And they did that on purpose. Nancy Pelosi doesn't want this stuff to pass, which is why she gave away her leverage in the first place. And what was that leverage? That leverage was to hold the stimulus to the richest people in the country. And they didn't. They passed it unanimously. That's capitulation. That's 100% corrupt government. And that's why America is going to be Brazil in about 3 or 4 years. Let me just finish.
Nancy Pelosi is one of the richest people in the country. She's taking care of herself. You have to at least admire her
grift. Her grift. She's a grifter. Yes. Yeah. So inside this article, it says Representatives Pramila Jayapal and Mark Pocan, leaders of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, which is absolutely fucking worthless. They are worthless. Here's what they're doing. They're seeking to postpone any vote until next week so that members can fully digest the bill and potentially push for changes. Under no circumstances are we ready to vote on the bill this week. You're going to do whatever Nancy Pelosi tells you to do. So why are you pretending, Rashid? This is bullshit. You're going to do whatever Nancy Pelosi tells you to do like a good little girl. And so is Mark Pocan. Like a good little boy, you're going to do whatever Nancy Pelosi tells you to do. I'll bet you $1 trillion you do that.
Or $3 trillion.
Jayapal said she was still reviewing the 1,815-page bill and wasn't prepared to support the measure yet. I'm reviewing it. She said she's focusing on 3 areas, Dylan. She's focusing on help for the unemployed to get them back to work, access to health care. She's using the bullshit terminology. She's using it. Access to health care and support for small business. This is them completely capitulating in a moment when they should be pushing for Medicare for all at the top of their lungs and thinking of ways to put pressure on the establishment to make that happen. They are completely capitulating. First, Ilhan Omar said we need to fully fund universal health care, and now Pramila Jayapal is saying that we need to have access to health care. Okay, there's more. Jayapal pushed hard for inclusion of the Paycheck Guarantee Program in the new bill. But Ways and Means Committee Chairman Richard Neal, a Democrat from Massachusetts, turned it down, saying the proposal is too costly and complicated. The Jayapal plan, which is backed by more than 60 House Democrats, has a price tag of more than $600 billion for 6 months. Neal, instead, supported an extension of the employee retention tax credit backed by Democratic moderates, which still costs more than $200 billion. So that's the entire, I'm giving you, that's the highlights from the political article. It doesn't really tell you what's going on at all. But it does expose.
But for me, the headline, again, I don't mean to be so laser, but all you need to know is every single time, whether it's in the heat of the worst of the crisis with the market crashing or months to think about it, no UBI, no Medicare for all. They don't want it. They don't like it. They are against it. They don't want to support you in your home. They don't want to support the most vulnerable in the society. They don't want people to have mobility. They don't want people to have health care. Let anybody who ever again would ever deign to suggest that the Democratic Party either cares about working people or cares to give people health care should be punched in the face. This is a multi-month demonstration of conscious decision-making in the face of the largest budgets in the history of the world, trillion-dollar spending, and even with trillions of dollars available and money going to corporate lobbyists, I mean, you can run all the lists. Even in that situation, in the middle of a pandemic where we're at depression level unemployment, even temporary UBI and Medicare for all is something they do not want. And that is a stunning demonstration of hostility to the point of being murderous to the people of this country that you would never imagine from any sane or rational government on this earth. Not that, I mean, that's a stupid thing because there's no such thing as a sane or rational government. So I kind of hesitated before I said that. But anybody who is politically engaged, who is of the delusional belief that anybody in American politics cares about them, should rapidly discard that belief. And any Democrat who believes that the Democrats are Barack Obama or Joe Biden or Nancy Pelosi or any of these fools ever wanted to give them health care, ever cared about working people, ever felt their pain. This is a master class in the demonstration of not only the indifference to it, but the active prosecution of policies that are hostile to working people and the sick on behalf of financial institutions and the wealthy. That's who they work for. People should be in the streets. They should be full Yellow Jacket. They should be full Hong Kong. They should be shutting down the cities. But they're not.
Okay.
But there's lots of other countries that have complacently accepted an oligarchy and an underclass. India lives with it. Brazil lives with it. I mean, there are plenty of countries that have complacently drifted into this situation, and America seems to be one of them.
So we're just going to accept that we're going to have a two-tiered society, one mostly made up of the underclass, which will be the people who have no job and unemployment, people who are perennially poor, the generationally poor. It'll be then made up of workers who live paycheck to paycheck, and then maybe about 15% of the country will be able to, actually have a regular, normal life that we would consider a normal life. And we will end up like Brazil, right? And that's where this is heading, right?
I mean, we're trending towards a Brazilian or an Indian social architecture with a two-tiered system where you have 90-odd% in the underclass, and then you just have, or Mexico. I mean, this is how most countries end up. Russia. I mean, it is really the standard model. Europe is the only exception. And America had a moment after World War II where it actually had a middle class. But that has been, Bill Clinton really started in on it, and then George Bush and Barack Obama really did a number on it. And then Donald Trump, to his credit, basically just said, listen, this is all bullshit. Like, why are we pretending? Like, the one thing that I think Donald Trump had going for him was there was no sheen of class, like the aspirationalism of Barack Obama's celebrity to make people feel good while they're getting destroyed by the overclass. It's why we talked about the Bidens and the Obamas are more dangerous to the people because they're like a narcotic for people's psychology, so they don't realize they're getting the frog is getting boiled.
That's a great way to put it. They're a narcotic for people's psychology, so they don't realize they're getting boiled. That's the way I used to say it was that Barack Obama, or when a Democrat becomes president, half the left goes to sleep to all the horrible stuff that the government does, no matter who's the president. And that's exactly what happened with Barack Obama. And that's the case that I've been trying to make, and why I wouldn't vote for Hillary Clinton, because it would have put the left to sleep once again. And you can't protest against a good Democrat, even as they're kicking 5.1 million people out of their houses in the middle of a recession, as they're making the banks bigger, as they're opening up the Arctic to drilling, as they're letting cops crack the heads of peaceful protesters at Occupy Wall Street, as they turn their backs on union teachers in Wisconsin, as their collective bargaining is taken away from them, as they say we're going to let it play out in DAPL, as they bail out private equity firms that inflate the price of first-time home buyers as they leave office. None of that gets protested or even opposed or even talked about when a Democrat is the president. Unfortunately, none of that got talked about when Donald Trump is president either, because the Democrats are so corrupt that they don't have the ability to talk about those things. Instead, they talk about an evidence-free red-baiting conspiracy theory aimed at the president and any of their political enemies, which has now been completely revealed to be unbelievable malfeasance on the part of the FBI and the CIA and the NSA and the Democratic Party and the media. And so that's the world we're living in. There almost seems no hope. Anyway, let's get to what Matt Stoller says about what's in this bill, and then you can help us break it down. So that's what Politico said was in the bill. And here's what Matt Stoller says was in the bill, someone who actually knows a thing or two and started reading it. He says Pelosi put the corporate lobbyist bailout in her new legislative proposal. So did you know this, Dylan? There's a bailout for corporate lobbyists in this new bill.
I sadly did know that. I did, yeah.
Can you expand on it? You
got to make sure the lobbyists, if you don't bail out the lobbyists, who's going to pay for the politicians?
So how
the politicians bail out the lobbyists? They're bailing out themselves. How else are they going to pay for their campaigns and know what to vote for if they don't give taxpayer money to the lobbyists so that the lobbyists can bribe the politicians? Politicians won't know what to do.
So do you know specifically how this bails out the lobbyists?
They created it's a tax class. So the lobbyists have a tax classification that is unique to them as a tax status, and they simply included the lobbyist tax classification as qualifying for things for various government programs to allow them to draw money.
Okay, gotcha.
The same way that the government's allowing, like the Federal Reserve, they're like, the Federal Reserve is buying Treasury bonds, Federal Reserve is buying mortgage bonds, the Federal Reserve is buying this or buying that. Well, the same thing with these bailouts, whether it's the PPP or some of the tax credits and tax things that they're doing. There's layers of financial benefits that they're creating, and then they just assign those financial benefits to different corporate entities with different tax status. Of course, they don't pay for Medicare for All or UBI, but they go with a fine-tooth comb over each of the different tax classifications. And they made a point of including the tax classification that is corporate lobbying firms to make sure that they qualify for financial benefits from the legislation.
Okay, so there's that. So in this, before they helped anybody, gave anybody health care or a UBI, they made sure lobbyists got a bailout. The bill also lets wealthy people who make money from dividends and royalties claim the earned income tax credit, which is actually an anti-poverty provision. That is stunning. Wow.
Again, no Medicare for all, no UBI, but the new tax classification for lobbyists should qualify for all the financial benefits of the bailout, and there should be special tax treatment for the wealthy who collect dividends.
Dividends. So that's people who make a shit ton of money off stock investment.
Well, that's wealthy people who already inherited and own stocks, and they live off of the dividend income.
Yes. In other words, people who don't work.
But no health care for you.
But no health care for you. another provision, the bill gives a tax cut to upper income blue state real estate owners for 2020 and 2021. Were you aware of that?
I was aware of that. That's actually good for you, Jimmy. That is outrageous in its face. But if we're going to make an exception as a California homeowner, that's going to be good for you.
Oh, so this helps homeowners?
Yeah, this is there is. It's called the state and local income tax deduction. Yeah.
Oh, so yes. Go ahead.
So you could deduct your state and local income taxes from your federal taxes, and so that you don't pay both, basically. So it used to be that you were able to, let's say you paid $10 in federal taxes and $4 in state taxes. Instead of having to pay $14, you would pay $4 to California, and then you would say to the federal government, "I paid $4 to California, so now I'm only going to pay you $6." Then in the tax law change under Trump a couple of years ago,
yes.
They changed that because because Trump and the Republicans, that state and local tax income deduction is primarily valuable in places like California and New York, and other sort of New England and this sort of thing, where real estate prices are relatively high and state taxes are relatively high. And so that was really done as a vindictive move by Donald Trump and the Republicans to punish the blue states that didn't vote for him.
Got it.
So if you didn't vote for Donald Trump, you were given a tax hike a couple of years ago.
Right.
In this instance, now it is a relieving of that. However, it still prioritizes the relatively, at the very least, middle class, and then up through upper middle class and wealthy, because you need to be a real estate owner with real estate of some value and and live in places like Los Angeles or New York or Chicago or where the blue cities, if you will, in order to even benefit from that. So it still does nothing for poor people in this country.
Okay, so I'm a homeowner, but I'm certainly not an upper income homeowner. So I don't know.
No, but you live in California where the taxes are really high, so it is still a benefit to you.
Okay.
And as it is to me in New York. I mean, listen, it's outrageous for sure, just because it's an indication. Remember, the priority was the super, super rich first 2 months ago, the Jamie Dimons, the Goldman Sachs, et cetera. And then they're just slowly working down their progression to the middle class in places like California and New York. The point is they're leaving the people that are most destroyed by this completely off the list every time.
Yes, every time. The most vulnerable, the people hurting the most, are not being taken care of.
Grocery store workers,
Nope.
the Uber drivers. I mean, literally the people that we all most depend on, the people that are the most affected by the pandemic. You get it. Everybody who is by far that we depend on the most, that is the most impacted by it, is the group of people that is getting the absolute least from every piece of legislation, including this one.
Do you know if nurses who are treating people with coronavirus contract the coronavirus virus, they do not get to file workers' compensation claims?
I didn't actually know that. What's the logic there?
I don't know. I'm going to guess that the staffing of nurses at most hospitals are owned by private equity firms. That's what I'm going to guess.
So it's just sort of the total degradation and devaluation of all labor, especially the people that actually keep us alive.
Yes. So you know how,
as a national policy.
So when we have private health care, what happens is, what I'm starting to find out is that even hospitals are owned by private equity. They'll have groups of doctors, or say all the emergency room doctors and staff. They're run and staffed by a private equity firm. And so what do? Do they make sure there's redundancy in their staffing to make sure if there's an emergency? No, they operate completely on the margins, the minimum amount of staff to get the work done. So if there's ever a problem, you're fucked, like right now. And so so now I'm going to guess that's why nurses are not allowed to to file for workers' compensation if they contract the coronavirus while doing. Steph did a whole story on it yesterday, right? Yeah. All right, so let's move along. This is Matt Stoller saying, even some of the good things in this bill are bad. There's an anti-price gouging provision, except that it's enforced by the pro-price gouging Federal Trade Commission. And it seems to follow that the FTC to block state attorney generals from bringing actions under this section. So actually, they put this into the bill that you can't price gouge, but the people who are supposed to enforce that is the FTC, which is really the people who enable price gouging. That's what he's saying?
Well, not only that, but the people that would normally enforce the anti-price gouging provision would be the state attorney general. And so they said, we don't want price gouging. And the normal group of people that would police the price gouging being the AG in any given state, the Nebraska AG, the Oklahoma AG, we're going to suspend their authority and consolidate it at the federal level with the agency that has been the most active in. So it's as if I said, okay, I'm going to end price gouging, but I'm firing all the cops, and I'm just going to put the head of the FBI instead of the local police enforcing any rules. We're just going to do it all from Washington, D.C., even though everybody knows that the Federal Trade Commission works for corporate interests at the expense of everybody else, as opposed to the attorney generals who frequently, or not frequently, but if anybody's going to step in, it's not uncommon that it is the attorney general that once in a while will step into the breach on behalf of somebody.
So there's a quote from an old movie. I can't remember who the actress is, but she says she's on a ship, and it's that movie with Henry Fonda, and she says Barbara Stanwyck says only suckers play by the rules. And if you didn't think that was true, I hope that what we're living through right now disabuses you of that notion, because it is true. Only suckers play by the rules. The rules are made by these fucking criminals. The laws in the United States are written by criminals to protect criminals and to screw regular people. So anytime you can break the rules against this establishment in your favor, you should do it. And anybody who follows the rules of this establishment is a sucker. Is that too strong for me to say that?
I mean, I would love to dispute you just because I'm loath to even admit to myself the total degradation of the rule of law. And when the rule of law is completely degraded, obviously the doors of chaos are open. The whirlwind of chaos is open onto any society. But gosh, it's very difficult to find the other side of that argument. When there's such active prosecution of abusive policy at the federal level by all of the politicians. Again, the Democrats love to vilify the village idiot, and he's obviously an idiot and a dangerous and peculiar idiot at that. But it is he's a convenient excuse for the rest of their predation.
Yes. And that's what I have to tell my brother when he calls me up. Could you believe this guy telling people to drink bleach? This guy, we got to get rid of this guy. And I have to every time find a way to tell him what you just said, that he is a convenient distraction for the oligarchs to continue raping this country. And the more they get excited about something Donald Trump did, the more crimes they're trying to conceal. And that's the thing. That's why people are like, why don't you get more upset at Donald Trump? That's exactly why. Because they want me to get upset and distracted by Donald Trump while Nancy Pelosi passes his entire legislative agenda. While Nancy Pelosi institutes bill after bill that rapes America, it solidifies income inequality for at least a generation, and probably turns this country into Brazil forever. And
it's certainly what they're trying to pull off.
That is what they're trying to pull off. And I'm telling you, and you have of course, the corporate news sphere is completely worthless. But even the
the corporate news is the number one sort of high. They love to obsess about the village idiot.
Yes. That's what I'm talking about.
And the noise machine around the village idiot completely blocks out all awareness of the raping that you described and we discuss from time to time.
And it's just amazing to me to still see it happen, that people will give compliments to someone like Chris Hayes because he covered the Tara Reid story, or because he got pushback from his own audience. They called him a Russian because he covered Tara Reid and stuff like. And I have to remind people that Chris Hayes is the one who cultivated that audience to do that. He's the one who trained them. And secondly, everybody forgets that Noam Chomsky taught us the first order of business of people in the news on corporate news television. Their first order of business, their primary objective is to manufacture consent. And when they are not manufacturing consent, they are fired. Just like Ed Schultz was fired, just like Phil Donahue was fired, just like Ashley Banfield was fired, and just like I would be fired. That if you're not manufacturing consent, you are fucking fired. And it doesn't matter how awful you can be or how big of a liar you are, as long as your lies are at the behest of the establishment, just like Brian Williams. You will never be fired. There will always be a place for you because you are lying and still pushing, you are still manufacturing consent for the oligarchy.
You're part of the narcotic, right? You're part of the heroin shot that keeps the things numb so they can continue raping.
Right. That's right. And there's this guy, Anand. We're going to talk about him in another segment after we get done with you. I'm just going to tease it. He has a contract at MSNBC. He's a writer from the New York Times, and he has a new show on Vice, and he claims that he's going to really blow the lid off about corporate news. Anyway, we're going to talk about that in the next segment. It's kind of hilarious. All right, Matt Stoller says, bailout, here's what's also in this bill, Dylan. He says bailouts for mortgage servicers. Mortgage servicers, so not banks, but companies that service your mortgage. They get bailed out. Now, if you remember, we exposed that mortgage servicers are the most nefarious of maybe all the corporations because they have an interest in you defaulting on your home loan. Instead of trying to save you and save your loan, they try to trick you into doing things incorrectly so they can then foreclose on your house because they make more money. Well, guess what? The government, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, just bailed them out. That happened. See, were you aware of that, Dylan?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I was actually. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
but
right.
They have a huge. They give a lot of money to those politicians, so they really get whatever they want.
Yeah. Okay. One more thing. Matt Stoller says there's also a bailout for landlords, though there are strings attached on evictions. So that's good. I would say that's good. I would say, why not bail out landlords?
That's generally good, but when you look under the hood on that one, so for the small landlords, that's a great benefit. But when you look at the percentage of rental units that are owned by a relatively small group of people, in other words, there are a small number of really large landlords, and then there are lots of really small landlords.
Right.
But the lots of really small landlords are generally much less sophisticated and capable of accessing the large financial benefits that the large mass landlord owners are. So really what you're getting is a bailout for, again, large financial institutions like Blackstone that own rental units as the primary beneficiary. And they waived Section 8, which is a specific protection for the disabled and people that are the most vulnerable in the rental housing market.
What do you mean they waived it?
I don't know. They just waived it just because they're like, the heck with it. Why, if we're going to give the landlords a bailout, why should we make sure that the landlords have to protect the vulnerable? So
they're saying that you don't have. So we're going to bail out the landlords, but the landlords no longer are bound by Section 8 laws and regulations?
That was what they're proposing. Yeah, that's what they're proposing.
Jesus Christ. Honest to God, I'm going to start I don't have kids, so I can do this. I could start if I could just make sure I don't get.
But you have health problems, man. You got to wait for the vaccine before you can start the revolution.
As soon as this vaccine hits, let's remember, Occupy Wall Street didn't happen until a few years after, Barack Obama was already
2 years later. Two
Yeah.
years later, for sure. And this is all joking, and not that there's much of a joke here, but all joking aside, this is a extremely large, like larger than anybody can imagine large, extremely slow-moving crisis, which means that the change from one day to the next, whether it's the data on the biological side or the data on the economic side, all those things are it's a slow grinder. But it's an inevitable and massive role that could be intervened with some of the things that we've talked about. That's why they're using trillions of dollars. But instead of using the trillions of dollars to intervene against the massive, slow-rolling crisis that will play out over the next 2 to 5 years, they're using the trillions of dollars to actually accelerate the movement of the slow roller by consolidating wealth with the super rich while leaving the most vulnerable most exposed.
And here,
but it's going to take years to play out.
Yeah. And here, actually, so here's what you were talking about earlier about the healthcare. So Matt Stoller says, rather than just, and we talked about this on this show too, rather than just extending Medicare to the unemployed, this bill subsidizes private insurance via COBRA. What would we do if health insurance monopolies didn't get benefits? So Matt Stoller saying, well, why don't we just let the health insurance companies go bankrupt because they're just skimming anyway? Why would the federal government take a healthcare dollar and instead of giving it right to the doctor who takes care of you, give it to a third party, and then they decide how much of that money gets to that doctor and then how much money they get to keep, which is exactly our system right now. It makes absolutely no sense for the government to do that. It does make sense if you realize Nancy Pelosi is a criminal who's corrupt and bought with bribes and then distributes those bribes to all the other legislators in the Democratic caucus. So they're completely bribed and corrupt. They're criminal. Nancy Pelosi's not a nice person. She's actually your enemy and a criminal, and that's why they're doing this. You don't have to agree with that, but that's a fact.
Yeah, that's an empirical fact.
An empirical fact. As Truman said.
Yeah, you can call it empirical.
What? So Nancy Pelosi has become a 100-millionaire since she became a congressperson. And as Truman reminds us, the only kind of people who get rich while in government are crooks. Nancy Pelosi is...
It also helps because her husband is a financial professional, and financial professionals have been the single primary beneficiary of the bailouts in 2008, 2009, and 2020.
Here's one more. A federal bailout of debt collectors. So this bill also bails out debt collectors? Are you shitting me?
I missed that one, but that's lovely. Somebody's got to look out for them.
So, according to someone named Graham Steele, the House Democratic bill establishes a federal credit facility for debt collectors tied to forbearance on debt collection payments. Do you understand what that means?
Yes. So basically, they're saying they will give forbearance so you don't have to pay your bills.
Right.
For some period of time under some circumstances. I haven't been down into the weeds as to which bills, but that forbearance is a good thing. But the compromise is if we're going to give people forbearance from paying their bills, that's really going to hurt the bottom line from debt collectors who make their money by collecting fees, by collecting debts and repossessing assets. And so if you're going to give people forbearance, you then have to pay for the lost earnings for the debt collectors who can no longer collect their income from those who are in default because they've been given forbearance. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes. Here's one more. This is one of those ideas which sounds really good in a world where A, debt collectors are honest and rely on credible documents, B, debtors always know their rights, and C, the Fed is great at lending facilities that help normal people. So that's what he's saying about that. So if all those things were true, which none of them are, right? Debt collectors are not honest, and they do not rely on credible documents. Debtors don't ever know their rights, and the Fed is not good at lending facilities that help normal people, right?
That's right.
Okay. Okay. Here's one more. In the final piece that Matt talks about of this bill, he says it weakens Section 8 tenant protection. So you already talked about that. So that goes along with them bailing out landlords, and it weakens Section. So it is unfucking believable what is going on. It is like, it is honest. I don't even have word. I don't have the vocabulary to describe the, this the balls of what they're doing, but they can do this because they own the media. The media is complacent. They're not going to tell you what we're telling you. They're not going to tell you to be upset. They don't even show you that what's happening in France when the Yellow Vests riot. They don't even tell you that's happening, let alone tell you why.
Or Hong Kong. I mean, what they did in Hong Kong was spectacular. Millions of people organized spontaneously, but in an intuitive system using digital coordination, capable of overwhelming a city with 3 million people on 10 minutes notice. Made the French look like amateurs. And the French are the best in the world at this.
I did not, that is a story I did not cover. Now,
I was just over there in December, so I'm very familiar, and I met with a bunch of them, so I had more exposure to it.
What were they protesting?
They're protesting China trying to take over Hong Kong and take away their liberty.
Right.
They were protesting China's encroachment, basically. The fundamentals of it were there are two court systems. One is a court system in Hong Kong that basically is based on British law because of the legacy colonial system. And then there's Chinese law. And then Chinese were moving to basically eliminate the second jurisdiction so that they could extradite and charge people in Hong Kong, where Hong Kong has been for decades a safe haven for political opponents of Beijing. And that and that was seen as the sort of the final breaking point for the liberty in Hong Kong, which it was and it is. But what was spectacular about what they did in Hong Kong was they were able to again organize this concept where there was enough awareness and coordination. I mean, did you read all that Be Water stuff they were doing?
No.
Yeah, so they just broke it. So the French basically have a thing where they make an appointment to meet every Saturday in the middle of town in Race Hell. Right, that's every Saturday morning. Until this is over, we're going to shut this place down. Right, they shut down Paris every Saturday for months until Macron finally is like, no tab, whatever you want, I'll do it. Right, Hong Kong is even more sophisticated, where they basically just took four metaphors for water: so vapor, ice, liquid, and I forget whatever the fourth incarnation was.
Steam?
Huh?
Steam,
yeah. And so, and they basically would literally text each other with these different formations, and they would either dissipate rapidly, accumulate immediately, freeze and lock up a situation. And so those behaviors, which were intuitive and known within millions of young people, I mean, 3 million people go, it's crazy. And they could organize and shift immediately from these sort of locked cubes where they could shut anything down to complete an immediate, everybody would scatter, to the accumulation of dew, basically, where they would start to build. And it was just remarkable.
So, we don't have time to get into this, but so I had a guest on the show recently from the Black Agenda Report, Danny Haifong, and he said that their government is very responsive to their people. And I said, how could that be? They have one-party rule. Why would they ever be responsive to their people? What did you find when you were there?
Well, again, I was in Beijing a couple of times, and I've been in Western China once. I don't think I'm really qualified to have an opinion. I lived in Japan for a long time, and there's a saying over there where you visit you visit any country, but certainly an Asian country, but it's really not unique to Asia. But you visit a foreign country for a day, and you think you can write a book, and you visit for a week, and you think you can write a short story. And the longer you stay, the less you have to say. because it really becomes the complexity starts to reveal itself. I will say that Hong Kong is the front lines for freedom. In other words, if the agenda is to not have a single one-party rule, that the front lines relative to the encroachment of China on the world, and as much as I am happy to indict the American system, I view the Chinese, at least the Chinese government, as by far the greatest enemy of the West. I mean, there's the fact that they knew that virus was in their country, shut down the domestic flights, locked up their city, and allowed international flights to continue to fly, knowing the virus is on it, is one of the most horrendous things I've ever seen done. So, there's no reason to hold your breath waiting for the Chinese to do anything nice for anybody. But I really was impressed by the young people that I met in Hong Kong who were more engaged and more active and more conscious about their position relative to China and relative to the ideas of liberty and freedom than any group of people that I've ever met in my life.
What do you say to the people who say that China's so they don't do capitalism? I mean, they have a market economy. They don't call it capitalism, but that that their system, as opposed to our system or any others, has brought 500 million, probably more, out of poverty. Isn't their system the greatest anti-poverty program in the history of the world? That's what they would say. What do you, and I never know what to say back to that.
I mean, yeah, sure, but they also do a lot of isolation of minority races and killing them, whether it's the Uyghurs or the Tibetans. I mean, an authoritarian can tell you a great story about sections of the society that have benefited from their investment, but they don't tell you about the sections of society that they've either enslaved, put into containment camps, or killed.
Right. I
mean, the same way I can tell you a great story about American entrepreneurialism and the development of Google and Tesla and the glories of Hollywood and the bootstrapping of the small businesses in Nebraska, and those are all true stories. Those are real things, and they're good things, and they have happened, and they do happen. And the ability for a young comedian from Los Angeles to have a really popular web show using this technology and hang around and talk to his friends and other smart people and make a living, I mean, that's a great story. Excuse me. But it doesn't dispel the other story that we just told. So I can tell you lovely stories about some of the benefits of the Chinese investment in their infrastructure and their very deliberate planning, which is impressive, to say the least, relative to their development. But I can also tell you the stories of their brutal murder, containment, and destruction of huge sections of their population. And they are the only country in the world that rivals America for its imperial instinct. Russia doesn't exist as an imperial force at this point in the world.
No.
There are only two imperial forces on this planet right now, and one of them is China. And you could even argue China may be the most aggressive imperial force in the world right now.
So we spread our imperialism at the point of a gun and a bomb. How are they spreading their imperialism?
The Belt and Road Initiative, my friend. I mean, they are the greatest creditor and financier. They have been building a global transportation network, basically. So the Italians are bankrupt after the financial crisis, and they need to rebuild the port in Trieste in northeastern Italy in order to be able to bring imports on shore. They don't have the money, so the Chinese come in and say, we'll give you $30 billion. And now we control your port. But you get a brand new super state-of-the-art Shanghai port. And so they have been doing it with money globally for decades, and they continue to do it. The end game gives them total control of the global transportation and infrastructure network and total dependence of all of these countries on them as their creditor, which gives China incredible political leverage, whether it's in Africa, South America, or in Europe.
So no one's ever explained that to me before. So
yeah.
How
It's called the Belt and Road Initiative. When you do some reading, you'll be deeply horrified.
The Belt and Road Initiative. Okay, so
BRI.
okay. So now there's a military pivot happening to the Pacific, which because of China. How the hell do we fight against them lending money to other countries to build their transportation infrastructure with a battleship?
We don't. We used to fight against them doing it because we used to be the financier of choice for those countries. Right?
Yeah.
The part of what America did after World War II was the exact thing China is doing now, which is be the financier of choice for core infrastructure for distressed or developing nations in order to win fealty and access to their mineral rights. And the Chinese are now the primary practitioner of that practice, which is why they control not only all the onshore production that they have in their country for the world, whether it's rare earth minerals and the sorts of things that people talk about, but also their influence and control over much of the mineral rights in Africa, much of the mineral rights in South America, and then they'll go in and do things like they'll build free roads and hospitals, all these really actually great social benefits that create goodwill for them with the people, with the politicians, I should say, in the country where they're financing, but ultimately give them the ability to do what they will with that country relative to any Western. It basically extends their basic influence and their basic policy in direct opposition to the United States.
Okay, so now I understand it way more than I did before. Now I understand why there's a trade war. By the way, I heard today that the Chinese, because of the global economic distress because of the coronavirus, they've made overtures to renegotiate trade deals with the United States, but Trump has said he doesn't have any interest in doing that. Is that true? Do you know if that is true? Because I understand.
No idea.
I know that the first trade deal that the Trump that just made with China, they're supposed to buy $200 billion worth of stuff. It really was in the benefit of China, and there's supposed to be a phase 2 coming, which is never coming. Trump says it's going to come after the election, and that's because it's never coming, because China, there's really nothing in it for China to renegotiate. Do you know anything about any of that?
I just don't.
Okay.
I don't have any meaningful insight into that at all. I do know that China is by far America's greatest geopolitical foe. China is arguably better positioned than the United States at this point relative to their geopolitical ambitions. And it's almost an inevitability that by 2050, China will be by far the most dominant economy on the earth by a factor of double the United States.
Yeah. That's what it looks like. All right, so we don't have time to get to this. I'll tease it. I'll have to cover it tomorrow or maybe the next day. But this is a great article you sent me. And it's in media. It's called "The American Economy is Imploding, and America Is Too: How Coronavirus is Finishing the Job of American Collapse." And there's a quote from the article that he tweeted out, the writer. He said, "America's ruling class is now visibly made of predators, the kinds of men who put kids in cages or addict a whole society to painkillers just to make more money that they'll never spend." Wow, that's America. So that's an article, and I don't know if you have time. We don't have time now. We've already done an hour and a half with you, so we got to move on. But that's a great article. It's depressing as all hell, but I think it's important that people, we keep trying to find words to impress upon people's brains the dire situations of what's actually happening right now. And we're trying to do it in real time, not in a year when people start to realize what happened, but right now, so people can kind of plan for it. And this article is amazing. And he talks about the lack of response, right? So there's a response to the coronavirus, but the lack of response to which is what we talk about here, the UBI, Medicare for All. If they just did those two things, I think they could do all the other rapacious oligarchy stuff, and we could still maybe get along. But they are definitely turning us into Brazil on purpose, and we are ruled by sociopaths, and that includes every goddamn member of Congress and the president. There's no one doing what they're supposed to. No one is saying what they're supposed to say. No one is risking their own personal position to help anybody. And in fact, people like Bernie Sanders are actively gaslighting you right now, telling you Joe Biden has a plan to help you or fix you, and that Nancy Pelosi's doing the right thing. He just tweeted that out today.